Just over 8 months before the Beatles officially parted ways, George Harrison wrote what some rightfully consider a masterpiece of music and lyrics, only for it to be unfairly dismissed by both John Lennon and Paul McCartney when he brought it into Twickenham Studios the next morning. Nevertheless, the Beatles did end up recording it, and we, the fans, are truly the beneficiaries of that decision. The song in question, a waltz inspired by a BBC television show George was watching during the evening of January 7, 1969, was titled "I Me Mine," and though its lyrics may seem simple, and even somewhat cryptic, the message behind them is as deep and mystical as any Beatles song ever put forth. However, to explain it properly, we need to take a step back to the spring of 1965, when George was first given LSD at a small dinner party by his host, a dentist friend of his, when a few hits were slipped into his drink. John, too, was drugged with the narcotic, without either of their knowledge of having taken it, or what it was once they'd been told. About an hour later, John, George, and their wives, Cynthia and Patty, were breaking through to the cosmic realm. That experience forever after altered George's mind and life path. After that night, he would take acid frequently for a period of just over 2 years, until he felt he'd gotten all he could from the mind-expanding chemical, and abruptly quit it for good in the summer of love, 1967. Nevertheless, during the time he was taking it, he experienced the numinous in ways that would change his life forever. "Having LSD was like someone catapulting me into space," George would write in his 1980 autobiography, also titled "I Me Mine." "The LSD experience was the biggest experience I'd had up to that point. The mind goes so fast, and so far, and I had flashes, realizations, where I would work out the whole universe, and then go back to the starting point and think, shit, I'm back where I started." To George, being back where he started meant being back to having to experience the universe through the lens of an individual ego trapped in the material world, after having reached a deep state of oneness where the ego had disappeared and everything exists as a singularity, God consciousness. These mystical concepts, the spirit catapulting through the universe, complete oneness, ego death, God consciousness, are Indian in derivation. And it was during one of these LSD trips that George heard a voice in his head beckoning him to study the yogis of the Himalayas, a quest he would happily take up for the rest of his life on Earth. His ultimate goal was to reach that divine state of oneness again, and this is how he fell into transcendental meditation, a method of visiting God consciousness without the aid of psychedelic substances to unlock the pathway there. But, as all on Earth are destined to be, at least temporarily, after transcending to the great absolute, also known as the Big I, George always had to return to the material world, where the ego, known as the little I, separates and dominates. This is what I Me Mine is all about, George's displeasure with that fact of materialistic life. "I Me Mine is about the ego problem," he explains in his autobiography. "There are two I's, the little I, when people say, I am this, and the big I, the complete whole universal consciousness that is void of duality and ego. The big I I'm talking about is absolute, whereas we're in the dualistic relative, where everything is good, bad, yes, no, up, down, black, white." After breaking through the relative realm on LSD and temporarily visiting the absolute, only to be shot back into his ego when the trip was over, George was left with an intense sense of longing to go back. As he explained, "After one dose of acid, I felt like I was stuck in this thing, which later I realized is called relativity. I looked around and everything I could see was relative to my ego. You know, that's my piece of paper, and that's my flannel, or give it to me, or I am. It drove me crackers. I hated everything about my ego." Stuck in his ego and surrounded by everyone else's, not least of which John and Paul's, whose egos would trigger George to temporarily quit the Beatles 3 days after writing I Me Mine, he penned these words: "All through the day, I me mine. All through the night, I me mine. Now they're frightened of leaving it, Everyone's weaving it, coming on strong all the time, all through the day, I me mine. All I can hear, I me mine. Even those tears, I me mine. No one's frightened of playing it, everyone's saying it, flowing more freely than wine. All through your life, I me mine. Knowing the context behind these lyrics puts them in great perspective. Those three words, I, me, and mine, are the three most commonly used words in reference to the individual, and it's the individual George was resenting. He had glimpsed the universal and didn't want to settle for less. But through that seeming resentment came a lesson, or rather, a goal to strive for. George was shown there is more to existence than what meets the, dare I say, I. He would clarify this much in his autobiography by concluding, "But later I learned from it, to realize that there is someone else in here other than old Blabbermouth. Who am I became the order of the day." Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the video. Now, as a bonus, here's 5 additional facts about the Beatles' I Me Mine. 1. John Lennon isn't on the track. When the Let It Be movie was set for release, because it featured George working on I Me Mine, the production company requested the Beatles record it for the soundtrack, which George, Ringo, and Paul did after the release of the Abbey Road album, in just one day. That day was January 3rd, 1970, nearly 4 months after John had quit the band, unbeknownst to the public. 2. Though the song is short, the original recording was even shorter, coming in at only 1 minute and 34 seconds. Let It Be producer Phil Spector would copy, cut, and paste the new tape onto the end of the original to stretch it out to the 2 minutes and 25-second version we all know and love today. 3. Though not recorded along with the rest of the Let It Be album, the Beatles rehearsed the song over 40 times in a row the day George brought it in, though John showed little interest, griping that the Beatles only play rock and roll and there's no place for a Spanish waltz. 4. Multiple religious lecturers, authors, and academic scholars have cited I Me Mine as one of the most spiritually influential songs in modern history, crediting it for bringing attention to Eastern teachings of ego and Western lessons of salvation that Beatles listeners otherwise would most likely have never considered. 5. Before their official ending, I Me Mine was the last song recorded by the Beatles. Once again, thanks for watching. Don't forget to help out the channel by giving this video a like and share. And if you haven't yet, hit that subscribe button for more content like this in the future. Until next time.